Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday morning. Come on, trickle in. We're going to give it a few minutes while we wait for more people to join. So please come on in. You can see us. You can't hear anybody up right now but me. You can see us. You will not see yourself. So if you're confused, you are in a webinar, not a Zoom meeting. So it is okay that you cannot see yourself, okay? Please come on in. We will wait about a couple minutes and then we will get started with today, and I will introduce all these lovely faces that you're seeing. Hello, everyone coming in. Thank you so much for joining us on this Saturday afternoon again. Just going to wait a couple of minutes to let a few more people join, and then we will get started. Again, this is a Zoom webinar, not a meeting, so you will not see yourself. So do not worry if you don't see yourself, and you won't hear anyone right now because it's just me talking. So we will start in about 30 seconds. Okay, we are going to get started with this. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is AFUA OWUSU, and I am the Director of News and Local Programming for WCIU TV in Chicago. I'm also the first Vice President of NATIS, which is the National Arts and Television Academy. I'm sorry, the National Academy of Arts and Television and Science. Thank you for spending part of your Saturday morning with us. We do these workshops in an effort to help encourage, guide, and motivate young and experienced professionals as they kind of meander through their career. These times are never really easy coming out of the pandemic. We have kind of shifted into a hybrid model. So a lot of our workshops are virtual to give people across the country and in other areas that are part of the Chicago Midwest chapter an opportunity to participate. So please take advantage of having these seniored and young professionals in front of you. There is a Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom ribbon. Throughout the discussion, please feel free to leave your questions or any comments that you have in that box. I will be asking those towards the end of our time together. We'll be together for about 2 hours. The last 30 minutes of that will be dedicated to answering your questions. All right. Please allow me to introduce our distinguished panel of guests here. I'm very excited to have some of these people with us, all these people with us, really, because they are all very seasoned and passionate about what they work on. We'll start with Alyssa Kaufman. She's the digital producer at WBBM CBS Chicago. She covers breaking news for CBSChicago.com. While working closely with the morning show producer, she also manages the station's social media sites, and her claim to fame is launching the CBS Chicago TikTok account. We also have Beth Godwig. She is a news writer and producer at WBBM TV as well, in addition to writing for live broadcasts and streaming shows for CBS Chicago. She also works as a professor at DePaul. Moving on, we also have Frank Whitaker. He is a retired station manager and vice president for NBC News, NBC5 in Chicago. He worked for the station for more than 25 years, becoming one of the longest serving newsroom directors in Chicago television history. We also have Jessie Garcia, who's the news director for CBS 58 and Telemundo in Milwaukee. She's an award-winning journalist, and she spent 25 years as a sports anchor and reporter before transitioning to management. Joining us also is Chip Brewster, who currently works for Nexstar Media as the on MediaWire, the national digital team for Nexstar, working as a producer and live stream host. Also joining us is Andrew Rowan. He's a multimedia journalist at WCPO TV in Cincinnati. Andrew graduated recently from Northwestern University in the spring of 2023. So he is just getting started. And so before we get into looking at what Andrew's perspective of the business is, I'd like to start with someone who's spent a good amount of time in the business, who has also always maintained a very kind and approaching attitude for young journalists and seasoned, Mr. Whitaker, Mr. Frank Whitaker. Now that you look at the landscape of TV from where you started to where we currently are, what is the biggest difference that you've seen in that time frame that you've been working?
Oh, wow. There's been a lot of change. I think the technology has dramatically changed our business, both in terms of how we gather news, how we put on our newscasts, and where they're found, what platforms they're found on. And that, as we'll talk about a lot, is, in this workshop, is constantly changing. I think back even 10 years ago, the idea of actually doing a live shot rolling down the expressway with a live picture during a snowstorm was like what? Like there was no way. You'd have to put the minicam truck, park it on the side, and you'd have, that's where you'd be doing your live shots, pan in your live, the technology, that's just an example, but the technology has changed so much how we do what we do. In some cases, making it easier, in some cases, adding more responsibilities to other jobs that already existed. And sometimes that challenges journalism, the ability to do journalism when you're also doing technology functions too. But I think the technology has changed the most. Obviously, viewership has changed. The media landscape is so much more fragmented. Back when I started, there was, channel 2, 5, 7, and 9, and 32 here in Chicago, and that's where people got their entertainment, got their news, and websites were not even really a thing then, and now it's a 24/7 game. Even you have a 5 o'clock news, but you got to be in the game 24/7. So that is, you're always putting out news in some fashion. So that's a huge difference too. So I'm sure I'll think of others as this conversation goes on, but those are a couple of things that I think that have really changed our landscape.
And Alyssa, so Frank mentioned websites. I think the advent of web news has definitely changed the way local journalism in particular is done, because we have this mindset, TV first, but now we have had to adapt to encompass the web. Can you speak a little bit about the importance of web content in this digital age?
Yeah, well, I think that the audience has expanded so much. I've been at CBS Chicago for 5 years now, and even just seeing the way digital has taken such a role throughout those 5 years is really interesting. But I would say it's the news gathering and the audience that we bring to our website is getting stronger and stronger. So the audiences who watch TV versus, stream us, check us out on social media, or just go to our website, it's a really different audience. So we're almost targeting to a whole new group of news viewers that didn't always exist before, whether that's through social media. I have a lot of friends and family or viewers who come to me who say, oh, I saw that TikTok story. And it's funny because that actually started as a broadcast story. So we're reaching new audiences, and we're understanding that people are not just coming to TV. They're not just coming to the website. They're coming to all of it, and they're different. They're different types of viewers. So as digital, we're really focusing on this new audience now.
And so then, Beth, as someone who has worked with students in the past and who continues to, what is the teaching aspect of this? How are we shaping young minds and young future journalists to understand that there is a dual component to storytelling now that goes beyond print or television?
So when I'm at DePaul, I have two classes I teach. It's writing for broadcast and then news producing. And I get a lot of students who are in writing for broadcast, but they don't necessarily want to go into broadcast journalism. Maybe they want to go to print. Maybe they're thinking they're digital. And I tell them, you need to think, because everything is so intertwined now. You need to think about how you tell a story in several different ways. When you're shooting your video, if you're on air, you have to think, okay, well, how will this play on the web? Or what can I do for social media to either promote the story or to get people to say, give them a little snippet and say, for the full story, go to our website. And it's such a different concept. Because they're all different mediums, but they have to work together. Like, we get a lot of different things. Alyssa and I are currently working on a series. I went on a shoot yesterday and I said to her, what do you want so we can do better? Like when you're making a reel for Instagram or like making a TikTok, or just when you're putting this on the web, what do you need? And our photographer, I said to him, I'm like, hey, just so you know, I'm going to be shooting on my phone. And he's like, why? And I said, I have to do this for digital. She wants a vertical video and this is going to help. And he was like, I've never thought of that. And so so not only is it just the students, you also have to work with your coworkers and say, this is what we need. This will work better, because things don't work the same. And then part of it too, when we're in class, I say to them, you may all think you want to be on the air, and then you get there and you're like, no, this on air thing is not for me. And there are lots of jobs you can do where you're still a journalist, you're still in a newsroom, and they need different things. Or even for the people who are like, I'm going to be a print person. Okay, well, you might get interviewed for TV and you have to think about how things work in sound bites. You can't have these super long explanations. You need to be more concise and clear. So things like that. And I think we all know every journalism site has digital. They have things where they're showing you video. They have new things. So it's kind of like, again, it's all just intertwined. You have to rethink kind of our old school things.
Yeah, and you raise a great point about everyone coming in thinking they want to go on air. I make it my personal business to try to change every intern who wants to be on air into a producer. But Chip, let's talk a little bit about the introduction of OTT and live streaming and web specific versions of newscasts and the creation of that. So can you explain first a little bit about what it is that you do and what that means in the scope of broadcast journalism?
Sure. So, I mean, I've done a myriad of things since I moved over to digital from broadcast. First and foremost, the job I was hired on for at WGN before getting this one, it was advertised as one-man band anchoring, which that's not a title I'd ever seen before. And essentially it was, I sat down at a computer and I controlled everything. I built the graphics, the scenes, transition between scenes, audio was under my control, interviews, how things moved. I was literally the entire studio plus the anchor, because I was also on camera doing that. And I did that for about 2 years at WGN before moving into this role, which now at a national level within the company is in one part still focused on live streaming events, but it's bigger, more broadly interest events. But another part like video on demand creation. So those videos that can go with web stories that are written that maybe don't have a video already able to be attached to it, because we're trying to have video in every story. But the live stream piece and the OTT, while I was at WGN, I got into the technical side and learned quite a bit about that setup and WGN Plus as they have there. And so for those that don't know some of the terminology, I'll give you 4 that are pretty interconnected as far as bringing broadcast to digital. So OTT, over the top. Those are the additional apps more often than not. Like I said, WGN Plus is one for WGN, where you can access some kind of news product, broadcast product, through a television or a smartphone. So through the internet specifically. Right now, most of those, what they're doing is mirroring their broadcast news, and then either putting up some additional content in between live newscasts or repeating live newscasts. But it's just a way to take what is already being made on broadcast and getting it out to viewers through a platform that the station, the company essentially still owns. But then there are 3 other ways that you can take your broadcast content creation and get them out there. One is a fast channel. Maybe you haven't heard the acronym, but you probably know what I'm talking about. It is free ad-supported television. If you have a smart TV and you've ever gone into like the smart TV channel list where there's like 2,000 channels and you're like, what am I looking at? They are television channels in the traditional sense, but all sent through the internet. So it's an oversaturated space at the moment because they're so easy to make, but it is another digital avenue where we can take this broadcast content and distribute it in a very similar way to the over-the-air signal, OTA. And then the last two things that I would bring up in this kind of live streaming digital video space are AVOD and SVOD. So VOD, video on demand. A is advertising, so you get like a pre-roll before that video clip, and S is subscription. So there are two methods, because everything ultimately revolves around revenue, of course. Two methods to gain some kind of additional revenue for video clips now that you're assembling or clipping from the broadcast product. So that is the broadcast merging with the internet world. I was kind of involved with that at WGN, and then where I'm at now, it's the video on demand piece, creating those clips, creating the live streams that are specifically for our websites. And I could keep going. I mean, I got a whole list. We could talk about ATSC 3.0. We could talk about third-party distribution through YouTube, Twitch, but I will leave that for the next part of my questions.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you giving us a very thorough breakdown on that, because I think some people may not realize that when you enter into the broadcasting scape, that it goes beyond just being on camera, right? It goes beyond just being a producer or a photographer. There are so many different avenues that people can take. And as this world continues to evolve and as technology becomes even richer, these opportunities, as you described, between the OTT and a FAST and the AVD are all options that people can pursue, because you yourself have made that transition, which I'm sure wasn't easy. So what kind of motivated you from going from on air to now taking more of a behind the scenes role?
I mean, you're right. Behind the scenes. Okay. I'll give that to you a little bit, because I'm not on broadcast, even though I'm still on camera. To be fair, the internet reaches further than our broadcast signal in Chicago. Nonetheless, what motivated me, frankly, is just I'm a local kid. I grew up in Lake Zurich. My wife's a high school sweetheart, so we just wanted to be back in the Chicago area, and that was the job that was available to me that fit the skill set that I had. I did my interview through OBS and CG'd myself and changed my scenes and whatnot. So it was just a way to get back home. But since doing that, it has been interesting to see the evolution from the digital side. And there's so much being talked about, being looked at, and we haven't even broached AI yet on this side of our lives as content creators, that I don't know. I mean, I might be staying in this space because it's going to be a wild ride over the next few years.
And so, Jessie, as Chip mentioned, like the internet does reach more, but the broadcasting, people still go to the TV first for breaking news situations, for localized specific information, whether there is a massive fire in their area or it is something national like the COVID pandemic. So when we look at this, at the scale of where things are right now, broadcast television, while the viewership may be down, people still are driven to it when there is something happening. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I mean, we're all fighting for a smaller and smaller piece of a smaller and smaller pie. So there's no doubt about that. Because as mentioned, Chip mentioned, I mean, saturation. There's just so much saturation and so many ways for people to get their news. But you're right. If there's a massive storm, if there's an election night, if there's a major breaking news, whatever it is, people still do come to their televisions for that. And so they still do trust their local newscasters when it comes to that. But I think we also have to be a little forward thinking on some of this. I'll just give you an example. If there is some sort of breaking news in the middle of the afternoon, like at my station, we pause and think, where are people at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon? And where are they looking to get their information? So instead of just automatically cutting in on the air, in the middle of our afternoon programming, do we want to just go on the web instead? Do we want to hit Facebook Lives from the newsroom? And if it's a big event, say, hey, folks, we're going to be back every 20 minutes with an update, because we believe that more people at that time are not rushing to their television sets to get their news. They're busy. They're out and about. They're doing their daily jobs, but they're checking their phones. They do want to know what's going on. And then they're tuning in for a regular newscast time. So some of this is still, just about like kind of thinking about where people are at. We always say we're trying to meet people where they're at to the best of our abilities. A couple other things that came to mind as the conversation was going on. I do think it's interesting. We actually get more applications for associate producer or digital content producer than an on-air position these days. So I find that fascinating. I don't know if people are starting to realize that there are all these other jobs in the newsroom, and maybe they would like to be a writer, they'd like to be contributing, they'd like to be doing things, but they don't necessarily want to be on air. But I mean, it's exciting from that standpoint to know that if you post for digital content producer, you're going to wind up with a huge pool of people to choose from. And same with associate producer. Or, producers are hard to find, people who've been in the business for a long time, but we have this associate producer program that takes a lot of younger people and teaches them the skills, et cetera. So I just found that to be an interesting trend recently that I've noticed. So I'm curious as everybody else, as to, whether people are trying to turn away from being on air, or it's just a product of them kind of finding these things. And I did want to mention that at CBS 58 Telemundo, we have digital days too. So we don't stream 24/7. We are not in that business right now at my station, but we do lean into digital hard in lots of different ways. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is to have digital days for reporters. So they have regularly scheduled digital days where they work with the digital team to create content only for digital that day. And so they'll figure out what it is that they're doing. Typically right now, we're pushing ahead to a story that they may have coming up. It might be a feature story for our Sunday morning show. It might be a special project that they're working on, and they'll spend the day either making a TikTok, making a Instagram, whatever it is, going on Facebook Live, talking about this story. So it is something that we're trying to carve out space for our reporters to also understand the importance of digital and not just broadcast. But it's all tricky. Everything we're talking about here is tricky because nobody's been able to really figure out how to monetize digital. And we know the future is digital, but how do you monetize that? And, I mean, as Chip said, there's revenue. I mean, I think it was Chip. Sorry if it was somebody else. Revenue is so important. I mean, it is the bottom line. And it is a business. And we're in the business of storytelling, which I personally think is the greatest business in the world. I absolutely love, our roles in the world. But there is a business side to it too. And so most people aren't going to sit through a video to watch a clip of something, an ad, I should say, to watch a clip of something. So, I think everybody's trying to figure out what is the future of TV news? How does it work? And how can you monetize it so you can make payroll and, and give people a living in this career that they love.
And so, Andrew, I want to ask you, as someone here on this call who has kind of grown up in an age where technology has always been at your fingertips, and social media is natural to you. It's a twofold. So let's start with the first part, and I'll come back to you in a second. One, let's go back to what Jessie said earlier. Do you find that there are a lot of young journalists who are seeking opportunities that are off camera? Or do you think out of your graduating class or amongst the group that that it's still heavily driven to be on camera?
I think of the students I worked with at the campus TV station is about a 50-50 split. I think everybody comes in their freshman year doing the on-air thing and then realize, I like the writing, or I like the imaging part, or thinking out how to showcase in the studio. And so maybe I'll go that route versus going out into the field, sort of wait for the content to come back. But that's a pretty small sample size from our class.
Do you think though there were, or have you seen any experience where there was support for people who were trying to go the non-traditional on-camera route? Do you think that they were able to find jobs or find mentors who could help them in that space?
I think so. Yeah. It's a lot of internships is really key for that, and sort of speaking up and saying, hey, can I learn a little bit more about that? Or when we were still in school, reaching out to producers in the area and saying, hey, would you look at our A block of our newscast and say, what could we do better with the tools that we have at our disposal in the newsroom itself? And hopefully look at some of the other larger Chicago stations and say, hey, maybe we could try that. And working with our faculty and say, can we try something like that? So a bit of a mix.
And now as a working professional, I'm sure in your newsroom, there is this conversation. How much do we do for social media? Or how much, or stop wasting your time on working on content for social media? TV comes first. What are your thoughts behind some of that?
We're a pretty split newsroom in terms of giving equal priority to TV, which of course having those assignments, but also we bring up digital in our morning meeting. So when I head out for the day, I know all of my assignments for both TV and digital. So yesterday I was on a bit of a quirky story of a new public art piece that was a 30-foot alien on the side of a parking garage. It had a big magnifying glass, a big green guy. And so it's one of those things that we knew was inherently a digital story. People were going to click on that and be like, what is that? So going out as an MMJ, I knew that I had the 4, 5, and 6 o'clock, all different assignments, both thoughts, look lives, and a package. And then I also had for web, a web story, a vertical video, so a TikTok and an Instagram reel that we shared both places, and an image gallery for the web story. And so I sort of went in knowing that, how I shoot this needs to fit all these different priorities. So that was helpful to know, A, before I got out there. So I didn't do a bunch of really tight shots for the package and then had nothing to crop in for on vertical. But it was just me. So I knew that I couldn't have a photographer shooting the broadcast package and then I was going to do everything on the phone, which I can sometimes do if I'm paired with a photographer. And so I think it's just a matter of knowing at the beginning of the day how you're going to fill all that content holes, and then also almost producing your own story when it comes to digital and say, this fun moment that I was going to put sort of as a bridge in the package really needs to be the first thing in the Instagram reel, the TikTok, because that was going to get people into the story. It can't be as long. There can't be a setup, sort of playful with the anchors. It really needs to get into it. And so it's a lot of managing your time. Time is sort of my biggest enemy during the day with all of these different assignments, and also saying, hey, we know that this is an equal digital story for today, so we really need to give that attention.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about managing your time, because you are a multimedia journalist, so you're an MMJ, you're out there most of the times by yourself. This is also like the only version, I'm sure it's fair to say, of your broadcasting career that you've ever known, correct? So you haven't regularly worked with a photographer. So for you, what is that? How do you balance that workload? How do you make sure you make your deadlines? How do you make sure you get things done in a space of time that allows you to also kind of not be stressed and overwhelmed?
Great question. And I'm fortunate too. I get to work with a photographer maybe about half the time, but on the days that I'm alone, it's a lot of thinking, where can some of the same content fit in different ways without a lot of tweaking. So I know that my look live tease that a 5 p.m. producer wants for the bottom of the 4 o'clock show might be a really good place to put a WCPO logo in the corner and use that on Twitter as a, hey, check out this fun story coming up. It's sort of already pre-built out for broadcast, but it would also work in a 16:9 ratio for Twitter. Front loading as much as I can, sort of thinking the night before and saying, hey, could I set my interviews up for 10, 11, 12, is always the best sort of day to be able to have some of the more back-end editing. But it's also sort of reaching out to the digital team when I need help and saying, hey, it's 5:50. I just submitted my 6 o'clock package. I still have web, a photo gallery, and a vertical. Which one of these do you want me to prioritize for today? And maybe tomorrow morning, I might be able to wrap up the other one. So it's really working with the rest of the team that knows sort of what their priorities are, because I sort of feel as the content gatherer, what they need the most.
And so I sat in the audience of a panel a couple of months ago about generative AI, which means the introduction of AI into the newsroom that would help write scripts, cut video. These are tools that some journalists saw as job stealers, but a journalist like yourself, Andrew, would you find something of that nature to be an aid, or is that something of concern for future journalists? And that's a really wide open question to ask you, I know, and don't feel like you need to answer it in specifics, because I know you want to keep your job and all that stuff.
Sort of in the writing process, it's a no-go. Like, I'm not putting transcripts into there and saying, hey, give me the key points or things like that. I do like to use it in the pitch discovery process and saying, hey, it's a snow day. We've seen a million different snow packages. What might be some interesting people to talk to? And then I'll go, oh, that's interesting, and sort of use that as a first place research. And also when it's a topic that I know nothing about and I want to sort of know where should I start some of my reading, or what are the key points that I should know about, then I'll say, oh, I have no, what is key point number 4? And I'm not going to ask key point number 4 from the generative AI, but I might use it to then go into a more of an official source and say, hey, could you tell me a little bit more about that? So I think using it in the pre-work, before I actually step into the office or into the actual reporting process, the research has been key.
And Beth, how are professors kind of making students aware of the points of plus and points of negatives in using generative AI? Or have you guys not had those conversations yet?
I think we have conversations, but it's not so much of this is exactly what we're doing or this is how you should use it. It's just like, hey, let's talk about it. And I know especially at colleges, there's been a little bit of issue. I haven't heard too much of it at DePaul, but there's been a little bit of issue of people trying to get around their work and just using AI to write a paper, or like Andrew said, research is great. Use it for research. But it hasn't been so much of this is how we're going to use it as a tool, or this is how you're going to use it as a journalist. I'm also a council member at the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, which you guys all probably know because the screenwriters just went on strike and messed up all your TV and movie viewing. So sorry about that. That's not my division, but we all support them. But we've had discussions in the WGA about AI specifically. That was a big thing for the screenwriters. And it's been a topic brought up by journalists in the WGA to say, like, hey, let's monitor this. Let's get ahead of it and let's see how it can be used as a tool, rather than, instead of hiring a producer, just use the AI for it. Because I think we all know anything can be a useful tool. Like, it's not immediate that this is going to take over and this is going to ruin everything. Like, scare tactics are scare tactics for a reason. They get people motivated and involved, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the thing is bad. But I've looked at it and dabbled in it, not necessarily to write scripts, but just to kind of see what it is and what it does. And some of the stuff it does is amazing. And then sometimes if you would have it write a story or a script, it's telling you, it snows in the middle of July in Chicago. I mean, it's not that bad, but it's wrong. It gets stuff wrong. And if anything, I think it could just be, people need to oversee it if it's going to be something we go. And like we said, technology has changed so much and it's going to keep doing this. So we all have to be a little flexible, a little more willing to try out new things, and willing to say what works and what doesn't.
Chip, you mentioned that you had some thoughts on AI. I'm guessing it's more so in the component of like video production, or are your thoughts on AI more content based?
So it's a little bit of both. The discussions are happening right now, whether people know it or not, of how AI could be implemented responsibly. And there are companies out there that are trying to figure that out and then pitch the corporate structures of all of our owners. How could we incorporate their product that uses AI? So I have seen, for instance, right now there's at Nexstar anyways, there's a full AI ban. There should be nothing that involves AI, but they're figuring out how to bring it forward. And one of the things in discussion is, where is the line between content creation and content reorganization? And that's, for instance, you have a photographer shoot all the video. You have a reporter write the script. If you have AI take those two things and then create the edited piece, was that content creation, or is that simply doing the busy work part of now taking the actual content that has been created and putting it together? And then you can start to even piece things off from there. All right, well, what about just clip selection? Maybe not editing, maybe not transitions, or just transitions, maybe not clip selection. So there are products in existence right now that are doing those things. There's also AI voices. And so now you're starting to, okay, if you had someone write the script, is the voice part of content creation, or is an AI generated voice totally fine for like a digital only video project? So that's why I'm like, that's going to be a wild ride over these next few years, because those conversations are happening right now. And it's such a gray area of discussion. And there's so many opinions as to what does cross that line and no, AI shouldn't be involved versus what is actually a good tool, a good time saver, a way to make the process more efficient for everybody involved. And again, and Jessie reemphasized, yeah, I'm the one that talked about revenue, is that it all comes back to that. If one of the products pitched to me directly was from someone, and they was just picking my brain. He's like, hey, we're working on this thing. How do you think it could be used? And it was essentially, you have an MMJ shoot a whole interview. He or she feeds the interview into this product. It transcribes it. It identifies succinct bites based on what that person indicated in their settings. And they could go through and click, I want this bite, I want this bite, I want this bite. And then it does the in and out and puts the video on the timeline. So that was a tool. It didn't create anything, but it really sped up the process of logging an interview and then putting them onto a timeline. So it's going to be interesting how different companies and different organizations start to use or not use the tools that are being created right now.
And Jessie and Frank, I want to go back to something that Chip said. So as hiring managers, as people who your newsrooms and your news product is successful by the content, but also the people who are driving that content, the trustworthy voices and personalities that sometimes stations are built around. By having an AI led anchor package or video heavy package in a newscast, does that start to I don't want to say dumb down, but I'm going to use dumb down some of the trust that some of these networks have spent decades and generations building with the community?
I think you have to be careful of that. So AI has exploded in the last year. Like, I retired a year ago, so AI wasn't really on the radar when I left NBC, and now in the last year it's become a big thing. So I actually took a Knight Foundation course this last year because I didn't know much about AI, and it was very interesting to get the history of what AI is, and how it came to be a thing. And it's all based on data that's in the world, but it's whatever data is there is what it harvests, and it can produce what's called hallucinations, which are mistakes, errors in what what the product it comes up with. So you have to be careful as journalists, because I wouldn't have it write a story necessarily. I wouldn't, I think anything like any way you use it needs to be checked by an editor before it gets published or put on the air. But I would absolutely urge everybody to dabble in it, because there are a lot of ways, and Chip mentioned like process stuff where AI can be very helpful. Some of the things that came out of the course were document analysis, like campaign finance records. AI might be really helpful in analyzing that and going through that, a process that might otherwise take hours to do. Transcription, a lot of us use Otter to transcribe sound bites. That's a form of AI. Processing tips and emails that come in, sorting them out, what goes to the assignment desk, what goes to the consumer unit. AI can be helpful on that. There's discussion about high school sports scores. Could you create a story, based on high school sports stories? That starts getting into journalism, and, but if it's something simple like that, obituaries for newspapers. I've found I've used it a couple times on some of the boards I'm on for job descriptions. Give me a job description for a church minister or whatever. Oop, you get a whole list. It's beautiful. It's amazing what it does. So I think there's lots of ways to use AI, but you have to be careful in terms of creating stories. So your point was, can you start creating with automated voices and stuff? I think that's that's going over the line to me. I think you have to be careful of that. I did have an idea. We all do when tornado warnings happen. We're all jumping on the air with continuous coverage and radar. What if nobody's in the weather office? What if it's unexpected and you're not staffed? Could you have an AI generated voice over radar jump on the air right away and give the viewers the information they need and show them the radar? Could AI be a tool for that, to service the viewers? So I think there's ways to use AI. We just have to be careful as journalists.
And I will just say at this point, I don't think we've had any AI generated content on the air or on our platforms. But I was just actually showing my management team the other day how quickly it can do this. So I took a package script, popped it into ChatGPT and said, create the web version of this for me. And, in 2 seconds, it spit out absolutely beautiful web copy for this story. So we're just starting those conversations now. What do we do? How do we handle this? And, if we ever were to put something on the air that was AI generated, this point, my feeling is that we didn't have to disclose that. AI voice, AI generated, whatever, something like that. To your question, Afia, I have not seen anybody's reel or work or anything that they have ever said this was generated by AI. I would hope that they wouldn't pass that off as their own work, if that's what they're attempting to do. Because, I mean, as I just said, all you're doing is saying one quick question, and it's generating everything for you. So really, where's your brain power that's going into that and creating that? So I want to see the brain power of the people that I'm bringing into the newsroom, their real brain power. So yeah, I would hope that somebody wouldn't attempt to pass off a package or whatever it might be if it was generated by AI. But I do know that some people are, using it as the way Andrew mentioned, just for like pitches and things like that as well, ideas. I do some fiction writing on the side, and in some of these fiction writing groups that I'm in, there's a lot of talk about how to use AI for fiction writers. And you can, if you've never been to a place and you want to say, describe a market in Cairo for me, it's going to tell you everything it needs. It can do character generation. You could say, give me a 42-year-old woman who does blah, 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 to kick out this character for you. You can have it write a full chapter for you, which seems so unsatisfying to me. I don't know how somebody could just say, please write my next chapter, and feel like that was like you were, part of the creative process. But it's coming faster than we all thought. And like everything else that's changed in technology over the last number of decades, we have to ride the wave. You have to understand it. You have to learn about it. You can't pretend it's not there, and you have to create some guideposts for it, some guardrails. Like, how are we going to deal with this? Because it's inevitably going to come into our newsroom for better or for worse, and we need to figure out how to do it. So still feel like we're at the very, very tip of this, or at least I am, and trying to wrap my brain around all the possibilities and things that it could do. I didn't even realize, Frank, all the things that you just said that it could potentially do, so I think that's fascinating. And I think this 2024 is going to be a year of all of us learning a ton about AI. And those of us who have kids, grandkids, whatever, we start to think about what their world is going to be like too, growing up with this just around them all the time. And it's going to be very different from the world we were in.
Jesse, I think a concern for some people also is that if we look at the creation of social media, it went unchecked, right? And now we have podcasts for every single person with a mic is a podcast host. Every single person with a phone is a content creator, right? And now these people are also they have millions of followers who take their word as law in some instances, in some places. And so I think what concerns people like myself, I'll be bold enough to say, is that if we don't figure out a way to either regulate or put some parameters around the use of it, it can get out of control in the way in which we're seeing some of our media now, where it's hard to discern what's fact from fiction. And so Alyssa, I'm coming to you because I want to know, in this space where people really don't call, and kids in particular don't really call it TV anymore, they call it content. Like, what are you seeing? How are you seeing this rapid change, and what can we be doing as local broadcasters to kind of set ourselves either apart or lean into?
I think it's a lot about sourcing. And I think that right now, I'm working so much on social as a digital producer. I think that's the hardest part right now, specifically with Twitter, or now called X. It's really hard to decide who's a public figure, who's an official, and who's someone who's just posting. And I think because we all have access to our phones, we have to be really careful. And I think the news judgment is more important than ever for new journalists coming in, because it's really hard to determine what information is accurate, and then with reposts too. So for example, we found a video yesterday where it was a CTA train and there was a car door opening and somebody posted it. And, that's news. That's really interesting. A safety hazard on a train that everybody takes every day. But we had to decide, who posted that? When did they post it? Was it posted a year ago and it's reposted now and we're calling it news? So what we need to do as digital producers specifically is really get to the source, find out as much information about the video that we can. But I think news judgment's really hard. And back to the AI conversation as well, just because we have the information doesn't mean we need to post it. And I think in a TV platform, it's easier to say, hey, we're live, we're right here, we're seeing it with our eyes. When it comes to digital, a lot of the content we're using, we're not necessarily seeing in real time. So we always have to make sure that just because we have the video or just because we have a source doesn't mean we necessarily have the full story or we have the accurate information. So I would say with all of this, news judgment is most important. And there's a lot of gray areas.
I could
And
just jump in really quick. Sorry if you.
Go
I
ahead.
was just going to say, people do try to fool TV news stations and other media outlets, and so they will send you a video that they claim that they took or that happened in your city. And so news judgment is more important than ever. I was thinking about the Taylor Swift AI and what happened yesterday, and I mean that's an extreme, or 2 days ago, I guess it was. That's an extreme case in that I think most reasonable people would realize that was not true, those weren't real photos of Taylor Swift. But it's an example of something that you could take anybody and make an AI image and send it to a TV station and say, hey, here's your mayor, here's your county exec doing XYZ, and it's the onus is on us to take a breath, make sure, do our due diligence and not rush to be first on the air with something, because you're going to get burned. You have to, check all those boxes and make sure that what you're getting is real. We had just gotten, as one example, somebody had sent in a video that they claimed was showing an event in Milwaukee. But when I looked at it, I said, those trees don't even look like Midwestern trees. This cannot possibly be in Milwaukee. So we sent it to Milwaukee police to have them check it. And they said, this is out of Florida. This is not, this was a fake video that's circulating all over the country. So, I mean, it wasn't a palm tree, so I'm not that ignorant, but whatever foliage was behind them, it was like, no, not, that's not our area. So, but I had reporters rushing to me going, we have to get this on the air. Look at this video. This is terrible. This is horrible. We have to get this on the air. And, as managers, I mean, we're that last guardrail too, to say, hold on. We're going to vet this. We're going to check this. Something feels fishy about this. And if something in your gut doesn't feel right about something, just take that extra time to figure it out, because it's not so important to be first anymore. It is way more important to be accurate, because as we know, there's so much distrust in television news anyway. And we have to build that trust up.
It's a really good point. Alyssa, I want to go back to you too. It's been mentioned a couple times here that there is a difficulty in monetizing social media content, digital content. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think can you see any trends as to why it would be hard to monetize on news in particular? Because it seems like everybody with a TikTok account who can dance is making $1 million.
Yeah, I mean, but you can go viral on a story, but it doesn't necessarily benefit your station in terms of a profit. And so that's something we have conversations about and we're working towards. I think that the future probably is monetizing streaming. And so ad revenue towards streams. I know for us, our stream really is a way that we can reach audiences when broadcasts aren't on. We just had a breaker yesterday where there was a police investigation in the Loop, and we were able to go on our stream when we weren't in a broadcast. And so hopefully in the future, different markets can see that is the way we're reaching news, the same way TV has reached in the past. So I do know with social, it is hard because we want to prioritize it. We want to be there just like every other station is, but we do sometimes have to, prioritize the more profitable platform. I do think though, as it becomes more normalized in the newsroom, digital is going to grow in that sense, but I think the growth will meet in the middle eventually, I hope, but it will. I might hope so.
And Chip, for you, for being primarily streaming, is it I guess you probably have a little bit more freedom on the kind of content that you can program?
Absolutely. Especially depending on, so, you know, you say stream and that can mean a few different things. For me, it's really event-based and the raw feed of that event. So like, honestly, what does really well on YouTube a lot is the Fed chair. There's just a lot of people really interested, and they're usually Wall Street people that just want to watch that thing
Okay.
as it's happening. But so, yeah, because I don't have a schedule that I must adhere to, must be on from this time to this time. I don't have content requirements, whether it is the type of content or the amount of content. You know, broadcast first fill, okay, and then we can trim down and hopefully give it the best stuff that we got. But you can't have that black hole. You can't miss your deadline. It's just the nature of television and live delivery of that. But on stream, it's as Alyssa said, like the loop, the thing that happened in the loop yesterday, it's okay, let's get a camera down there. Oh, we have confirmed information. Let's take a tower cam that shows the loop, pop up the stream, anchor goes, okay, now we got a live camera on the ground. And there's also no limitation on time either. So it's almost always a breaking news situation or some kind of niche thing where you have some devout audience and you know, broadcast, you have to cast a wide net. So maybe they tap into the thing on broadcast, but then they can say, for those that want to continue watching this particular event, we have it streaming in its entirety on our website or what have you. And so there's another element to that, in that internet consumers usually are a little more narrow focused, narrow minded in the type of content they want to consume, but you also are available to the whole world at that point. So there's some benefit to being niche. And then there's also just the platforms. One thing that's been thrown out several times, and I love that I'm hearing that, is this transition of mindset of that we are not the distributors, we are the content creators. Television in a legacy format, all mass media, radio included, newspapers, we were the place because there weren't other options. But now with the internet having really taken hold and all these other platforms, YouTube, Twitch, you can get into social media stuff, TikTok, Instagram, where people can consume information. It's really looking at our business and going, you know what, we're the professional content creators that have the training and the judgment to go with all of this. How then can we get it to the audience? As opposed to saying, we are the gatekeepers to distribution. It's we're creating good content. Let's get it to as many places as we can where there's as many eyeballs and revenue opportunities as there are out there. So like I will live stream, yes, to websites that are owned by Nexstar, but also to YouTube, because there's monetization to that. I'll stream to social media channels only for a branding kind of thing to say, look at us, we cover this regularly. But of course, I've got a link to our website then to try and get that redirect and some kind of revenue out of that eyeball. But yeah, as far as timing, Wild West in that regard. Is something happening? Let's turn on the live stream.
And so then, Andrew, for your in your experience, is there a platform that social media platform that you kind of prefer?
I like Instagram and Twitter a lot. I'd say most of my peers are probably on Instagram and TikTok. When I talk to my non-news peers, so sort of recent graduates or in their young 20s, I do not know a single one of them who moved into an apartment and got cable. And all of them, when there is news, they will turn to an OTT, a website of a legacy brand station. One thing I thought was interesting, so I did an internship at NBC in New York, and my friend asked me like, oh, did you meet Savannah? And I was like, no, I didn't meet Savannah, but I met Hoda. And he was like, who's Hoda? And I was like, Savannah Guthrie, Hoda Kotb. He's like, who? No, Savannah Sellers from the NBC Snapchat show that she knew on Stay Tuned. And to me, that was fascinating because it shows, I think one of the questions earlier was about building trust with the audience over decades and some of that talent relationship, that it's still true, especially for us in our young 20s, but it's a matter of, okay, as we grow up and I enter my late 20s, my early 30s, for that friend who has an affiliation with Savannah Sellers, where does Savannah Sellers pop up once he outgrows Snapchat? I know we're using Snapchat less and less. And is there a way to sort of capture that eyeball into wherever the new platform is, but maybe still under that NBC umbrella? A lot of my friends, they tell me they get their news from the Bikini Bottom Fish on TikTok, which is this SpongeBob SquarePants guy who will basically do a VO. He'll do a reader, an anchor reader. He's at a desk. There's a little over-the-shoulder graphic with some video. I'm pretty sure the voice is AI generated, to be completely honest, because sounds like just like the guy, but he's talking about North Korea and the day's news. And so I think it's a matter of those dynamics are still there, but where do you capture the eyeballs?
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me because I think what I see on social media now too, in particular with younger journalists, is a more pronounced version of their authentic self. You're seeing them, dancing or telling jokes or outfits of the days, which is completely different. Like I would have never seen Ron Majors do an outfit of the day, right, on Instagram, or you would never have seen that kind of content happening here in Chicago. But there is this sense of vulnerability that young journalists are sharing that seems to endear younger audiences to them. And I don't know, Andrew, correct me if I'm wrong, or is it just because it's something that appeals to what everyone else is interested in?
I think it might be the latter. What I think about more is what someone like me would want to watch from a news package. And I'm fortunate that the newsroom here supports me, and that if I go back and watch, I was looking through some of our archived stuff from 30, 40 years ago, the package looks relatively unchanged to me in terms of the way it's shot and the way it's edited. And so one of the things that I think about in terms of a young person in news, also trying to attract some other young people to watch a story, is how can I use different tools to make the package a little more interesting, a little more looking like a YouTube video, maybe. So GoPros, drones, gimbals, sort of give it a little bit more of a cinematic look that is still conservative enough for TV. But if you were to put it maybe without a banner on YouTube with a cool thumbnail, it might stand alone and fit that other platform. And I think that's how I've been trying to be at least authentically me as a young person and fit it into the different social media platforms.
I like that because that's kind of what we do with one of our broadcasts on the block. It is created to kind of have that social media feel and vibe with heavy typography, animations, and graphics. And I think that is kind of what people are so used to seeing, especially spending 2 years in our homes, kind of connected in a way that we were not connected in a way before. It changed the way we looked at television, right? It changes the way we view content. And so Beth, in that space for you, again, as a leader of some of these young minds, what is something that you see? Where do you see TV heading from some of your students' perspectives?
It's funny. I always start my classes by saying, tell me what your name is, tell me what year you are, and tell me who you watch for news. Where do you get I don't even say who you watch anymore. Now I say, where do you get your news? And it was funny. They're not into the local news. Usually it would be a national platform like, oh, I watched the Today Show, or, oh, I watched Anderson Cooper on CNN, and all these different things. And now you do get like, well, so-and-so does this on TikTok, or I follow this person on Instagram. And like when it first started happening, it would be like here and there. And, I'd be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And, not that you think it's a blip, but you're just like, oh, okay, noted, and moved on. And now it's a lot more like, oh, I watched the stream of blah, 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 blah. And I always tell them like, okay, you want to be a broadcast journalist. What does that mean? Where are we working? Where are we looking? Because it's changing so much that you have to rethink, like, are we going to have a newscast for TikTok? Are we going to do stuff? We did in our newsroom at CBS, this is probably like 15 years ago, we had started where we had a 5-minute little newscast that was web only, and it was very simple. I can't even remember if we used video on it, but it was really simple and really kind of ahead of our time. And then for whatever reason, we just got away from it. I think the person got reassigned to do other duties. And it was kind of a bummer because you were like, oh, but that was so forward thinking. And, now with how much we're doing, but we talk all the time in class about whatever content you're creating, you have to think visually. what works for this. Like you always, it doesn't matter if you're a still photographer, if you're the cameraman, if you're the reporter, you have to think visually, how am I telling this story for different mediums? Because just like the basics of don't say today or yesterday or tomorrow when you're putting your story on, because it's going to be on the web and it's going to live there for however long. And if I'm watching this next week and you say, well, yesterday, like my first thought is, well, yesterday is in like really yesterday, or like yesterday when the story was posted, or things like that. So kind of a rethinking, like first off, just rethinking, and then visuals, anything. Like we're all on Zoom now. And during the pandemic, there was that Twitter account that was Room Rater and rate your room and how does your room look and what's behind you, and you get a 9 out of 10, or oh, you have a horrible setup and you get a 2. You know, little things like, is this going to be distracting behind the person? I was out at a shoot yesterday, and there's certain things that I think of, like as a producer, what's going to look good, or what's this, or what's that. And I always try, I think too, the other thing is you got to think teams. You know, when Andrew's by himself, he's at a bit of a deficit because he doesn't have anybody to bounce something off of, to say, hey, let me just spitball. Like yesterday at our shoot, I was talking to our photographer, I was talking to our talent, and I was just like, what do you think of this? Would this look good? You know, so collaboration and getting all of this stuff on whatever platform we're putting it. Collaboration is beneficial, makes a better product, and it helps you as a journalist, because no one should go into anything thinking, I know everything, I'm the greatest, this is going to be amazing, I'm going to have 57 Emmys for it. No, like you should think like, I want to put on the best thing. Who can I go to say, I want to do this, and what ideas do you have, or how can I make this better? We should always be looking to learn from our colleagues and to improve.
Can I add one thing to that we found on our college station is that, so we do the 30-minute newscast as sort of a skill building thing. We put it out on Facebook and YouTube. And 3-4 years ago, we were doing also a 2-minute version of the newscast. We thought people wanted to click through the campus headlines. There you go. And what we realized through someone bringing it to our attention is that a lot of people, we had a gap when they sat down for lunch by themselves. They wanted like 7 or 8 minutes as they ate their mac and cheese for the campus headlines. And so we basically expanded that 2 minutes to more of an 8-minute talking show. We said the news you need while you eat a bowl of mac and cheese is sort of the tagline. And so that was something that came out of someone in our newsroom saying, hey, what if we like made this a little longer just so that we can meet our college audience where they are if they're not sitting through a 30-minute newscast.
And that's so true. Whatever your audience is, you have to be willing to adapt. You might think this is an amazing idea, everybody's going to love it, and then you put it out into the world and maybe you don't quite get that reaction. So it's okay, get feedback. Like my feedback, I go to my daughter's school and I ask the parents there, and I'm like, what do you watch? What do you do this? What do you like? Tell me what you like. Tell me what you don't. And sometimes they are very polite and they just give me nice, sweet answers. And other times I will get, I cannot believe you did that story on the air, or, you know, for the most part, it's a little more positive than rather than negative. But I like that no matter what, they're saying like, we like this, or you should do more of this, or blah, 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 blah. And like you get it in your own community, your own group of family and friends, but also reach out to other people when you're at just different meetings or you're at things you didn't like. I drive my daughter nuts because we will be out eating somewhere and like the waitress will mention something. I'll be like, oh, so why do you watch that channel? Or like, you know, just completely. My daughter's like, oh my God, mom, like just let it go. Or even my husband is also in the business. And so we talk about different things. He's in the sports side, and he'll say different things he notices their producers doing. Or even my students will talk about when they go out in the real world and they're at different stations, I'll follow them and I'll be like, where are you at? Or I'll check in on them. Like, hey, I saw you were in the middle of a riot. Like, are you okay? How's your mental health? Or like, how did you handle this? Or they'll come back and say like, hey, this is going on in our newsroom. What do you think? Do you have advice for me? Because at the end of the day, our journalism world is really small. And like, we all know somebody that one of the other people know. Like I know everybody on this panel, except Andrew. Sorry, you're my lone, but I bet I probably know somebody, you know, but I can name at least one person. I know, clearly I know a lot of people who listen knows, but I can name at least 1 to 2 people that every panelist has. And it's a small world, and I can call them up and be like, hey, I was on a panel with Chip, you know, and we can talk about it. So that's the other thing too. It's a small world, so people know. And news is basically gossip. So we all gossip about one another and our product, and we all have opinions. So at least be open and be like, give me some feedback and tell me some gossip too.
Yeah. Whoever you call, don't believe a word they say.
I have a couple examples of things that we've tried at CBS 58 and Telemundo to modernize stuff. So we're doing what's called the rundown box. That's just our term at the top of the 10 right now. And so the reason that we did this is because in every other area of our lives, we curate our own content. We know, you know, we make our playlists and, you know, we decide what we want. And yet we are still expecting consumers to sit there passively for a half an hour and just take whatever is handed to them without knowing what's coming up, without knowing anything. So we created the rundown box, which right off the top is the anchors on one side, rundown box on the other, and has 4 things listed that are coming up. We had them with timestamps originally, and then that was getting a little funky because it wasn't hitting the exact time. So we took the timestamps out, but it's, you know, 4 things that are coming up in that show. And they just give 1 sentence about each. Ahead tonight, zing, zing, zing. I mean, you could call it a form of the headlines or teases, but it's a little bit different because anchors are part of it. You know, it's not a pre-produced slick kind of open. It is at the start of the show, and it typically goes in order of the things that are coming up. Our original idea with the timestamps was that if you see something that catches your eye, you could be like, oh, I can go brush my teeth and still make it back in time for that story. You know, trying to lean into people. So we've been doing that. Oh, I don't know. I want to say it's been months and months now. I don't know exactly how many months, 5 or 6. And so the rundown box is something that's different than anybody else in the market right now. We're going to stick with it, at least, you know, for a while. If there's big breaking news, we throw it out. We don't have to start with the rundown box. But then we tried something else that didn't work as well. We tried what was called the quick cast. And this was an idea that came from my then 19-year-old son. Now he's 20. And I asked him, what would get you to watch television news? And he was like, well, I'm never going to watch a half an hour newscast with commercials. It's just never going to happen. So he said, but if you push to my phone a short video newscast that recap news, weather, and sports in Milwaukee that day, I would be interested in that. And if it came to my phone every day at the same time, I would watch that. So we took that idea and went with it and started the quick cast, which got pushed to everybody's phone at 5:58 p.m. It was a couple minutes, you know, we just sort of taped a 2-minute piece. It was good. I liked it. I liked the quick cast a lot. It just wasn't gaining the traction that we had hoped that it would. It did decently, but it wasn't going gangbusters. And so after giving it like a certain amount of time, we decided to move our attention in different directions and start doing some other things instead. But, you know, those are the kinds of things that I think, you know, to your point, Beth, like you have to try and see what happens and see if something sticks or not. And I found it fascinating, Andrew, you're talking about bikini bottom news. I just wanted to take it back to, I used to teach college journalism as well. And one of the assignments that I would give my students near the end of the semester was reinvent the television newscast for me. I had about a 15 question template. So in your newscast of the future, short of being on Mars, you can do anything you want. So let's start with your anchors. Who are they? What are their ages? You know, what are their genders? Where are they standing or sitting? What are they wearing? You know, we just went through the whole thing. Is it traditional news, weather, sports? Do we bust that format? What do we do? And I always found it fascinating that, to be perfectly blunt, I was totally underwhelmed by the answers. Everybody came back with basically a version of the newscast that's been on the air for 40 years. So, you know, they would think about this and they would say, no, I still like 2 anchors, you know, at a desk wearing a suit. And these were young college students. And so, you know, to hear that they're getting news from Bikini Bottom News, I mean, this is what I was pushing for from them. Like, what is going to get you to watch a newscast? What is your preferred newscast of the future? And at least this was what, 5-6 years ago. People weren't thinking outside of the box like that. at least in my sample size. And so I do find it fascinating that now people are watching that kind of news.
All that you said, Jess, is amazing, because I think this is the conversation, like I know we have internally as a company about how do you get people to watch the news differently. But when we ask them, 9 times out of 10, they come back with the format that we currently have, which means that, I don't know if it's a comfort thing because it's all that you've ever known. Like when I was growing up as a child, my parents watched NBC because my dad really liked the sportscaster and Ron Majors, right? And then when they left, we as a family left, right? Because we were going for them. But it was this traditional 2-anchor, we have a weather, you have a sports person, and that's the newscast. And I think when we try to make things a little different, kind of like what Chip, what you've been working on, Andrew, what you've been doing, there's a subset group who gravitate towards it. And then there's a group who just completely don't understand it. So what can we be doing as local broadcasters? What can we be doing as journalists to help get people to understand, get viewers to understand that the news in its traditional format isn't the only way that you can get it on television or on a laptop if you're streaming, that you can see different versions of it. Alyssa, like, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's about giving the viewers what they're looking for. I know on digital, we're really focused on SEO. And then through using SEO, we're able to kind of see the keywords that people are searching for.
Can you explain SEO to people who may not know what that is? Thank you.
So it's search engine optimization. A basic way to think about it is the way that we pop up on Google. So search terms that people are using, popular search questions. It's little things that we can do in headlines, word usage, to try to bump our stories up, but also ensure that we're reaching the audience that it's meant for. So I think using those strategies, we use Chartbeat, which helps us understand which stories on the web are doing well. I can see in real time how many people are on each story. So I think that it's really important as journalists, we're looking at what are people looking for. So sometimes we'll look at Google Trends, different Chartbeat options where we can see what people are clicking on and how often and when. And so I think broadcast and TV focuses a lot on teases, tune in at 10, coming up next. You have to kind of watch some content before you get to sports or before you get to what you want. I think Gen Z and younger millennials, they want now. They want their content and they want to find it and click on it. And so that's why I think, a website works, because you get to choose the news you read. Specifically with social media, you get to scroll through content you're not interested in and then stay on that content. So I think as journalists, we need to focus on what content are people staying on, what content is going viral. It's not just to go viral, get the clicks and views, or a story on the website that blows up, it stays on top for days. It's not just the page views, but it's, oh, that's a topic our viewers care a lot about. So this past week it was weather. People are really impacted by weather in Chicago and are very interested. Sometimes it can be just a local story that was really interesting. And then sometimes it's a national story that people just really care about. I know on TikTok right now, true crime and investigations is really big. So I think as a digital producer, I'm always focused very strongly on what is it that people want, and then giving it to them in the platform they want. And then one other thing is cross-posting. So taking a video, putting it on our site is great. Also putting it on YouTube, because our YouTube viewers might want something that our site doesn't. And then putting those videos also on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, Facebook, seeing where it goes. And that's just a great way to reach our viewers where they are, instead of bringing them necessarily to just one platform.
There's a new article on Variety right now too that talks specifically about how TV news is aiming to solve the digital mystery, and can true crime shows like 48 Hours bring people back to television. And there's a couple blurbs, but one in particular that I kind of want to share and kind of get your thoughts, Chip, on. And it's that that TikTok is a creative marketing tool that helps us with brand expansion. Judy Tiger from the series executive producer says, younger viewers aren't watching us on the big TV networks. They see us on YouTube, on Paramount Plus, on Pluto, whatever space they're in. right? And so we know that this younger generation is going to be larger than what this baby boomer generation that's retiring is now. And we know that we don't have their eyes on TV, on the TV screen. So what's some advice that you would give maybe broadcasters on how to adapt or how to create content for these plus channels or these now live channels to kind of captivate these audiences?
That's tricky. I do honestly, truly believe a lot of the products that we do create are good for everybody. I mean, this journalism at its foundation, storytelling, we're doing a good job at that. It's the reaching part. So for me, it's not necessarily about changing the product. It's about getting it to the people that are watching it in all those different places. I've been hoping that we would bring up, and I don't know if this is the right time to do it because it is somewhat related, but the potential of ATSC 3.0. And because it is a true merging of internet and broadcast, and for so many people, yes, our phones, but everybody still has some big TV in their home. It's like in the central gathering place. It's where they watch Netflix, Paramount Plus, the streaming services, those fast channels. And so there's still a very strong draw to that. And being able to blend broadcast with the streaming piece, the internet piece, I mean, that may ultimately be what saves our industry as we know it, if it is a technology that becomes embraced. And so if you're going to get into that in the next 15 minutes, I'll wait.
I had no intention of getting into that, but since you've brought it up, let's get into it because you know a little bit more about it than I do. So educate us all.
Well, and the title of this is the future, right? So the ATSC 3.0, those may recall when the televisions were forced by the FCC to switch to an HD signal. That was 1.0. And so this is all about the next generation. It's literally next gen TV is what they're calling it, where they take our broadcast signal and they are changing the way it works, where it can include feedback. So as opposed to just, we are sending this signal and you just got to take it at what it is, we can now as a station receive information back, which enables a couple of different things. One, for instance, we could have metadata profiles, identifying demographics on who is watching. So like Nielsen will be a thing of the past. We will know exactly roughly how many of what age group, when, and how. But then that also means that we could send ads that are more focused. So as opposed to one ad that covers everybody, these 100 different households are all going to get 100 different ads because that is how we've sold that space and we have that information targeting that household. And this is through our over-the-air signal, through ATSC 3.0. It also allows for potential interaction where you can send something like a pop-up poll through your television signal. They could respond to that, and then you would get that feedback immediately in your live television broadcast and advertise that, as opposed to the two-screen solution that we currently work with. And that, I mean, just the fact that it's a two-way communication starts to open up untold doors and ways that could be utilized, like game shows. Like you could do an interactive thing where all of the players are those people at home, and there are apps that have taken off doing something like that. But as far as broadcast news go, like Jessie was talking about their rundown feature. So imagine that you've got a studio, you have 3 different solo anchor shots that are all going to do 3 different stories at one time. And your audience can pick which one of those that they're going to watch. Like instead of saying, hey, this is coming up, be like, okay, which one do you want to listen to right now, but still through broadcast and through your TV? And you would tap or select however the next gen TVs will work of the future. But that to me is a really interesting space because the way that society has developed in their content consumption through the internet, through choosing your content, YouTube, etc. This really, it's almost the blending of broadcast as a legacy media and the way that society has evolved with internet consumption. And I don't know, Frank, especially, I'm sure you're in discussions about it before you got out of the game, but it's happening. It's just whether or not society will adopt it.
Yeah, it's happening. And I think like anything else, where the revenues come from is going to ultimately drive its growth. And I think there's, I don't think we're anywhere close to the potential in the markets where it's been rolled out. But you could be watching a football game and you get a little pop-up thing. Would you like to order a Domino's pizza? And you say, Cliff, yes, I'd like to have a cheese pizza with pepperoni, and your order's placed. So that's the kind of advertising that can, if advertisers were to, become familiar with that and buy into that, there's a lot of potential. And, selecting ads for different zones and stuff like that, there's a lot of potential there. But I don't think anybody's totally figured that out. But people see, oh yeah, that'd be kind of cool. There could be money there. So.
To me, it's one of those things, Steve Jobs talked about, well, people don't know what they want until we give it to them.
Right.
And that's what made Apple so innovative. And this is something similar that if the industry as a whole, and that includes our television creators, like the, Samsung, like the people who build the TVs and sell them, embrace that. And then we teach our audience about this technology, is it chicken or egg? But
yeah, that's putting a lot of onus on the industry, which historically doesn't teach very well. Many households still don't know that they can get an antenna, to access broadcast television. So, Andrew, I noticed that you had some enthusiasm behind this.
Yeah, one of the things that I already do sort of feels a little bit like what Chip was talking about. So I have one of my YouTube accounts. I only follow the TV stations in town. They're the only ones I subscribe to. So when I go home at night and I want to catch up what was happening outside of what my core focus was, I'll just click on the first video that looks interesting to me. So I'm basically choosing my lead from what was posted that day. And then, like every other YouTube video, on the right, it's all these recommendations, which more or less are the other videos that were posted by the other TV stations that day. So I'll go, okay, I'm finishing this story. Like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't hear about this. Click on that. And I'm basically 20 minutes later caught up by watching all the channels at once. I'm watching an ad before I start on that, before each video. So I guess there is some monetary process in there. But I think when I talk to some of my friends and go, when you're getting your news on YouTube, what are you doing? They say, we do really like the part of the newscast where you hear something you would not have seen in your social media feed. We are bringing you something that is an interesting topic. We look for that exact same thing on YouTube. What's that interesting thumbnail that I probably would not have seeked out myself looking for it, but now that it came to me, I'm clicking on it.
This is such a tricky question because it goes back to the two major things. People want to curate their own content, but how do you monetize that? YouTube is not a big monetization. It has a very small amount of monetization, but it's not a lot. So how do you actually get to a model where it can help support something? I always loved the choose your own adventure books as a child for that very reason, because you got to decide. And an idea that I've been kicking around for years, but again, I can't figure out how to monetize it, is something I'd gotten from a yoga app I had, where you could just pick the poses you wanted in the order you wanted, pick the music you wanted, and hit play. And it would do that. And so, could we create a newscast where you as the consumer get to create your own newscast? You take all of the pieces that are out there from a day's news and you put them in the order you want and hit play. Today, I want to lead with sports. Today I want to lead with consumer news, whatever it is. And you make that newscast as long or as short as you want. But again, or very few people are going to sit through an ad to watch a video. They're just not, unless it's your child or some family member who's in that story, and so, how do you do it if you're not putting ads off the top? And even if you are, that's still not the amount of revenue that it would be for broadcast television and commercials. So, that's the dilemma that we're all trying to figure out. And I do think for broadcast television, personalities do still drive some of it as well. People make their decisions based on, I really like that particular set of on-air anchors, whether it's the anchors, the meteorologists, the sportscasters, the reporters, whatever it might be. So it is really important for those of us who are hiring to always remember too, that it does go back. Thankfully, there's still some human element to this. People like seeing other humans and they like humans that they feel connected to. So that is one area that you're not going to get so much of when you're in a digital space. You're going to get great news and the ability to curate it, but you're not going to get the the fun crosstalk and the personalities.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that is, otherwise I could just get my news on my phone. I don't have to watch the 5 o'clock news. But I think that comfort level with the people, that sense of community is still what does drive local television news, why people would come to watch us, even though the audiences are diminishing, there's still, that's the appeal of it. And I think, where people find that is growing. It's been interesting hearing the discussion about social media. I know at NBC, we kind of, we have Instagram and Facebook and TikToks and all that, but they don't make us money. I think a couple folks have mentioned that's a branding extension. That's to get people familiar with us, to get us to know our personalities better. But we're not making money off our Facebook posts. We're making money by getting people to come back to the website and watch videos or look at stories. We're getting money by getting people to come back and watch our newscasts. And the big push was streaming, and I think it still is. More and more people are streaming. They're streaming television. And I think this last year in July, streaming overtook cable nationally as where people watch television. Streaming, I wrote this down, 38.7%, cable 29%, 29.6%. Over-the-air broadcast has actually risen. It was back up to 20%. I know it used to be down to 12% in Chicago, but it's actually, as you think about it, it makes sense. You cut your cable, you order your Netflix and your Disney Pluses and all that. But now I can get that, good old Channel 5 and good old Channel 2, and I can still watch that. And it's free. It's coming over the air, so I'll get my antenna and do that. So actually over the air has actually increased in recent years as people have cut the cord. So, but streaming was viewed, and I'm sure it is at most companies, as a way to monetize, to actually make money off the content that we're producing. So the fast channels, I know at NBC, they're up to 15 fast channels in the country now. I know CBS was the stations were an early adopter of that, but there can be money made on that. Advertisers haven't quite bought into that yet. It's still a process, but I think there's a thought that streaming channels really can be a revenue producer versus some of the other digital platforms.
You guys have had an amazing conversation, just especially within the last 15 minutes, but I want to turn things over now to people who have been watching, our audience. They have some questions for you. And so I'm going to kind of go through some of them now. They're not necessarily pointed to people. Some are, some are not. So I will kind of just ask the group. But this one comes from Timothy. They've heard some stations going to pre-recorded newscasts, both not just for the weekend, but also during their weekly day parts. Some markets, but others are in top, some are smaller markets, I'm sorry, but others are in top 50. Live shots don't happen as often. There's not as much breaking news. Anchors seem to have recorded intros or transitions in between segments. They find this unappealing as a journalist, and maybe they're biased in that, but they want to know, what are your thoughts on pre-recorded newscasts? And is something like this going to become more popular as time goes on? I know that this is kind of big right now with some script stations across the country where they've let go of anchors and they now have predominantly recorded newscasts. Jessie, what are your thoughts?
Well, we have one station in the market that comes to mind that does pre-recorded, their weekend mornings are pre-recorded, and except for the meteorologist. So the news anchor part is all recorded, but they make it look live. He starts off, good morning, blah, blah, blah. Let's go over to so-and-so for the weather. And then the weather person is live in studio and does that part. So I think that it would be awfully difficult to pre-record weather. Even on a quiet day, it would be just difficult to do that. So, and then they throw to packages that they have just done throughout the week. So there's no overnight news. It's my understanding, as I said, this is not my station, but I think they pre-recorded on the night before. So, they can't do any overnight news because they wouldn't be there live to do that. So there is the danger that in a situation like that you are going to miss out on some sort of big breaking news. But they are covering themselves with weather. My station hasn't done that. There's been no talk of that. I hope it doesn't get to that, because I do think that there is an expectation of the viewer that what they're getting is the latest news. And if that's not what they're getting, that probably should be disclosed then. This is more of like a featurey weekly recap kind of show rather than a true newscast.
I will say in the market, we had CLTV, which was a longstanding, operated on a wheel format where there was like a segmented part of the day that was pre-recorded as well as weather. But you had producers in-house who would update that content. It was probably like every 4 to 5 hours that content would update. So Tim, it's not a completely brand new model, but it's also not, something that many stations do in larger markets. This question is for Andrew from Larry. And it's kind of similar. Is WCPO doing the news on a wheel without anchors or particularly with anchors? Do you know?
Yeah, so all of our newscasts still have anchors. We are doing I believe our 4 p.m. weekday, which has a lot of national content, pre-recorded sort of on that wheel. I believe they tape it about half an hour before, and they say it's to get they allow their night side anchors to do some more pieces during the week. So instead of, I guess, a full hour being on the desk, it takes them, I believe, about 10 or 15 minutes. Sort of what I can speak to more rather than what Scripps is doing is that from a reporter perspective, we just went to our Saturday night newscast, sort of as a trial run to this Scripps cast is the technology they call it. We do it very similarly where we tape it 10:15 for our 11 o'clock show. And we've done it once or twice where if there's breaking news, we're all still there up until the show finishes. So we've done a live A block or a live B block as needed. And weather and the tosses to weather are still live. So I think it's a matter of figuring out how to get more time in the day a little bit. One thing that helped us out is that we got a tip 2 or 3 weeks ago that there were some issues with the casino downtown after 11 p.m. and sort of unregulated taxis. And because I had done my live shot at 10:15 as part of our pre-recording, I was able to go at 11 and start working on that story for the next day. So in that way, it did save me time.
Okay. One thing that we didn't really touch base on here is the amount of journalists who are leaving the business, whether it's for hours or salary. So another question here is going back to AI, do you think that is something that FCC will regulate in newsrooms to ensure that there are continuous journalists working in these spaces and not having a lot of job cuts taking place as a result of generative AI?
I think they're going to have to. I think it's just going to become an issue where Congress is going to have to step in and the FCC, they're going to have to do some kind of regulation because it's a public interest. Like we want to make sure that our news organizations are doing what they're supposed to do and we don't have like some crazy computer overlord. I mean, we've all seen the movies like Terminator, or even like the last Mission Impossible movie where AI goes rogue and is like trying to kill everybody. I don't think it's anywhere near that point, obviously, but you're going to have some regulation. You had the grandfather of AI basically say, I think it was the grandfather, it was on 60 Minutes. And he was saying, I'm really concerned about this. So you have a creator saying this is something we should watch. And even the Chat GPT CEO said, we need to monitor this. This is not like, okay, I've created it, let loose on the world. So I think there's going to have to be guardrails put in and things. And I do think that they're going to have to step in and do something.
My hope is that the broadcasters and the newsrooms would come up with their guidelines before the FCC thinks they have to be involved. I think once the government gets involved in that kind of thing, it's not a good thing. And I would hope that the different companies and different newsrooms would figure out. I think you have to have some sort of governance and guidebook on what's appropriate and what's not. And I'm guessing that most companies are in the process of doing that, trying to figure that out. And I would hope that would happen before the FCC would jump in to make us do it.
And Chip, I don't know if you can answer this one from Ava. Is there any research on how audiences receive AI generated voices or content delivered in?
So I haven't seen research like any kind of survey or focus group or anything, but we've been discussing that because like one of the company pitches I heard 2 weeks ago, the AI voice, I was like cringe. And then one of my like boss, whatever, he said to me, he's like, you know, though, think about TikTok. the majority of voices in those TikTok videos is the AI voice that is being generated by TikTok. So there are generations essentially being trained that an AI voice is a perfectly acceptable way to deliver information. And so I would believe that we're going to have a generational divide on AI voice, and whether it's something that makes you go, oh, or yeah, so what? That's where we're at.
Yeah.
One of our reporters did a story on AI voices, and he cloned my voice and had it giving him a raise. And it was pretty humorous. But I have to tell you, it was frightening. He took my voice off a promo that we have, and he just plugged it into a program and typed in what he wanted it to say. And my mom was fooled. She thought it was my voice. So, you know, it's that good already, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah, that's the other thing. When I cringed, that same guy, he was like, "It's going to keep getting better. Just you wait." And he's right.
I'll tell you, when I was on at NABJ this past year, Microsoft presented a video, and the video was presented by the voiceover was Lester Holt. And at the end of the video, they let us know that that was not Lester Holt, but that was the AI generator, and it sounded like Lester Holt. So it was like, whoa. So yeah, I think the more and more you hear it, and then I think the more sophisticated the technology becomes, we might not cringe as much. Thank you for that question, Ava. I have a question here from Steve, who wants to know, as someone who is pushing out content in addition to a weekly package he produces, shoots, and edits for NBC5, how do I produce a 16:9 VOTs for X, a vertical shot for IG stories, another one for TikTok, a reel for Instagram telling people to click the link in the bio to watch the story the next day. Then, of course, post that link to TV on LinkedIn and Facebook the day after the story runs. Oh, and then post a thread. Any suggestions for a more streamlined strategic approach? Andrew or Chip? Oh, Chip's got your hand up.
I'm sure Andrew's got better ideas than me. I'll just give him the 2 tips that I have that I've been utilizing. I'm a big OBS proponent, and there's a function in OBS where you can have a 16:9 and a 9:16 side by side, programmed separately so they fit properly but move in different ways. And I make vertical and horizontal content in one shot that are optimized for the different platforms that want it a certain way. And then after I've done that, a really good tool, there are many out there, but IFTTT, if this, then that, where you can, or Social Flow, where you can put that piece of content now in one place and then have a series of rules essentially run, and it will distribute natively to different platforms in the way that you want it. A couple of them, you got to get a little tricky, you know, like adding the link to Instagram. That there's not a good way around that, but those are my 2 tips.
Sorry, when you said OBS, can you just explain what that is for someone who may not know?
OBS, Open Broadcaster Software. I'm literally using it right now. That's how I have all the fancy stuff on my screen, but it's free software. A vast majority of your YouTube and Twitch streamers are using OBS. It is a TV studio, a digital TV studio in a box. I mean, I could do a 6-hour-long session on OBS, so we shouldn't dive any deeper than that.
Thank you, though, for what
Sure.
you gave. This one is from Steven. They come from a generation of journalists who worked long hours, weekends. Oh, sorry, before I get to that, Andrew, did you want to add to Steve's question?
No, I honestly have the same question as Steve. I think of what I hear from some of my other peers who are first-year MMJs, they know how important digital is and social and filling all those platforms, but at the end of a day where they had a 4, 5, and a 6, it's the first thing that they just don't do because it's sort of inconsequential. It's not a deadline missed. It's just an added value. And then there are some days where, like yesterday, it was an important day to get that story across all of digital, but I missed Twitter and Facebook. I got my Instagram vertical video after I spent another time basically doing an additional package. And as quick as I think it is to just put a quick link on Twitter and Facebook, it takes 10, 15 minutes or so to make sure I'm responding to people. And sometimes I'll do a native vertical or a native video instead. And so it's a struggle. Yeah.
Alyssa, did you want to add anything?
I do think that, you know, cross-posting, as I said before, cross-posting is important, but I've had success. This might be a little taboo for the digital departments, but I have had success posting, a vertical video on Facebook or a horizontal video on Instagram. I know this is something Beth and I talked about, taking a broadcast, story and putting it on Instagram. So sometimes using the cross-platform formatting, you can have success with. I know it's not what we're striving for, but I think cross-posting in general is, you can have success and you never know where the success will come from. But yeah, I mean, the time constraint, I handle the social for my station, and it is hard to, get the stories on the web, but also make sure we're focusing on our social platforms. I think it's a struggle, but I am going to look into OBS. So thank you, Chip. That's a great
Sure.
idea.
There may also be, I mean, AI, this may get solved in the next 6 months. Someone's just figuring out AI and how you can have it process all of those and make it optimized for each platform. So maybe we all just have to chill and someone will figure it out.
And before I get to Stephen's question, Lee asked, is Facebook still a part of the social media strategy for stations? It seems like it definitely skews older in terms of audiences than Instagram and TikTok. Andrew, you want to answer that? Do you still use Facebook? Do you still promote to Facebook? Or are you, I know you earlier mentioned.
Hey, we should explain to Andrew what Facebook is first.
Right. No, none of my peers really get some of the content that I put out on Facebook, but it's the only place all of my parents and all of their friends and sort of pretty much a lot of the people I interview see their stuff. So
thank you for
I
making
feel personally attacked by that.
Thank you for making all this real. Jesse, I know that you do too. Okay, so I was gonna say,
we still use Facebook for link posts, and I think there is a place for it, and the comment section can be a scary place, but every now and then we'll post a link post where there's a good conversation. I think there's still an audience there. I think figuring out who that audience is where I'm at.
And Jesse,
in our market, we get a lot. Yeah, Facebook actually gets more reactions and interactions typically than other platforms. So Facebook is actually one that we still lean into pretty heavily. We've talked a lot about the kind of content that does well on Facebook, and the kind of content that typically does well is like your, feel good community type story. Something like that is going to do a lot better than a breaking news story, unless it's breaking news Facebook Live. People do love breaking news Facebook Lives, and we do a lot of Facebook Lives at our place too, to try to give people those little nuggets throughout the day that then will drive them, to the shows later. So we'll get pretty big tune in for that kind of thing. But if you were just to post, shooting or something like that, you're going to get a handful of reactions or comments or whatever. But if you post the cute dog, rescue story, you could be well up into the whatever numbers of thousands, et cetera, tens of thousands. So you have to know your audience, and you have to know the kind of content that works on each platform. Obviously for Instagram, you need something visual. So if you're running some stock photo on Instagram, that's not going to work. And as all of you do every day, we stop and think, okay, what story lends itself to what platform today, and how are we going to do this? But I will say we've dialed back on quantity, trying to go for quality. So we may be posting less on any of these platforms, but we're really going for that one that you're going to want to share with your friends and family.
Thank you. So going back to Stephen's question, he mentioned that he comes from a generation of journalists who worked long hours, weekends, nights, holidays, did whatever they could do to get the story or the show done. How does local news compete with many young people of the current generation who may not want to go the extra mile, but want to make a 6-figure salary? Frank.
I think you're going to have people, like I always say, it doesn't matter what you do, you need to love your job, because if you don't love your job, doesn't matter what your hours are, you do not want to get out of bed. And especially if you're going to be one of the people working overnights, it's hard. It doesn't matter if you're going to work at midnight, if you're going to work at 3 a.m., if you're going to work at 5 a.m. It's still hard to get out of bed every morning. So the first thing is you have to love your job. And if you don't want to put in the commitment, I totally get I don't want to work weekends. I don't want to work the holidays. Like, I've been at CBS for 20 years, and I am very lucky that I have Christmas off. And I know some of my younger colleagues this year were complaining to me about not having Christmas off. And I tried not to be the veteran going, suck it up, buttercup. But there's a little bit of, you have to pay your dues, and that's hard. And if you're not willing to do that, I think you know, we all kind of start out in the smaller markets. It's getting easier to jump up higher faster. But if you're the person who's like, I don't want to do this, you're not going to get out of the small market. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, everybody makes choices, and you have to have your work-life balance. So you have to decide what's important to you. Some people, I have a friend who has moved around at least 20 times, and she always goes to new places. So she ends up at the bottom of the rung. So I don't know if she's ever had Christmas or, you know, the big holidays off. And like, I know that's hard, but she is a really dedicated journalist, and that's something she wanted to do. And then I've had some of my students come to me, you know, 5 years in, 10 years in, and just say, you know, I don't think I can do this anymore. I want to be home for this. Or, you know, I don't want to work 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. I want to be home with my kids. And my first thing is, go talk to your boss, have a conversation, tell them how you feel, tell them what you're thinking, and see if there's any room, any wiggle room. Because some bosses will be like, okay, I didn't know that. Like, if they don't know, they won't do anything about it. But at least have the conversation, and also be prepared. The answer might be not what you want to hear. It, you know, I think we all know everything is not roses and sunshine. And sometimes you're going to get the hard answer, but you have to decide what's important for you. And you have to also be willing to put in the work. And journalism is not easy. Even, I don't really know anybody. I don't think any of us know anybody who has a 9-to-5 job in journalism, but even if you did, you're going to have hard days, and you're going to have days where it's work, but you just have to love it.
Thank you, Beth.
You know, I think I noticed after the pandemic that it was harder to find people who were willing to work weekends and overnights and a lot of the off hours. I think the pandemic made people look at the quality of their life and their schedule and work-life balance and all that. And then a lot of folks just said, you know, I really don't want to work weekends. So I would, if I had a job open for a content producer working, you know, 11 p.m. or midnight shifts on Saturdays and Sundays, those were hard jobs to fill in the last few years. People just didn't want to do it. And I ended up hiring people with a little less experience. One of my last hires was actually a student who was still at Northwestern's graduate program, Medill, and she started working part-time. We hired her full-time. She's worked out great, but I would never have hired, you know, somebody coming out of school like that, you know, 5-10 years ago. And so, you know, I think it changed. I think people are less likely to want to work the off hours, even if it's, you know, getting their foot in the door. I also think as a manager, you have to kind of really be more in touch with the folks that are working those hours and those shifts, because people do burn out, and there are people, you know, especially if they're top performers, you know, that they're going to burn out after a couple of years, or, you know, you just want to make sure that they're okay. And when things come up, you know, jobs come open that have better schedules, you know, think of them first, especially if they're a top performer, because you want to make sure that they're still happy and still motivated and all that. So, but I think it has become harder in the last couple of years.
And just, I'll throw in from my standpoint, you know, I do sometimes remind people we are a 24/7 business. And that is what we've all signed up for, to be a part of a 24/7 business. So if you do want banker's hours, you should work at a bank. If you want to be involved in television news, you have to understand some of the sacrifices that do go into it, whether that be nights, weekends, holidays. Being in sports, I worked, you know, almost 30 years of nights, weekends, and holidays. So, you know, I know exactly what that's like. We all get tired some days. I mean, I do too. But when, you know, what motivates me is that we have the honor and the privilege of documenting history. And it's the greatest job in the world, in my opinion. And so, you know, if I ever start to feel that way, I just remind myself that I have this honor and privilege of documenting history. And that always seems to inspire me. And I agree with everything Frank said. And, you know, we're also trying to find creative ways to offer folks, you know, that work-life balance to the best that we can, while still servicing a 24/7 business. So I'll give you one example. Our weekend morning anchor, we split that. So we have one anchor on Saturdays and a different anchor on Sundays, so that each anchor gets a weekend day off. And that has really made a big difference, you know, in terms of people just feeling like they have a little bit of a normal weekend that they can go out with their friends, et cetera. And then the last thing I would say, and this just goes for hiring in general, is that your reputation really does precede you in this business. And any manager who's doing their due diligence is going to call people at the station that you're at, or even at your college. So just remember that it starts in college, because all of us know a lot of professors. And if we know you're coming out of a certain college, we're going to reach out to that professor and say, hey, tell me about this person. And we want to hear great things, wonderful things, of course. But if we hear red flags, like this person was late every single day to class, this person, always was asking for extensions on assignments, this person doesn't work well with others, whatever the case is, those are going to be red flags for us. And same thing coming out of whatever newsroom you're in right now. When I hire folks, I ask everybody for references, as we all do. But then I go outside their references. I call their references, sure, but I'm always going to go outside their references too. And between everybody in my newsroom, I'm going to know somebody who knows somebody at that station. Or I'll just cold call the news director, assistant news director, executive producer, whatever it is, and say, tell me about this person. And most people are really pretty honest too, which is nice and helpful. And I would do the same if somebody were to cold call me and ask about a certain individual, because I just think it's important. We're all looking for good newsroom citizens. And when I'm hiring, being a good newsroom citizen is almost, I shouldn't even say almost, it is as important or more as having the skill set of being a good journalist. We can teach you some of those things if you're a really good, hardworking, big-hearted, good teammate person. But if you're coming in and you've got the skills, but you're toxic to the newsroom, then that is a much worse situation to be trying to disentangle yourself from if you get into that.
Sure.
So we're really careful on who we hire.
Yeah. And I think a part of the question, though, that maybe I'm being nitpicky here, I think that we didn't answer, is the fact that there is not a salary component that matches the expectation for the workload that we're asking journalists to do day in and day out. And so part of the question was asking, how do you compete with young people who want to be paid more? I think as seasoned journalists, Beth mentioned, you pay your dues and you see that increase in salary. But what we've also noticed in larger markets is those big salaries don't exist anymore. So what is the motivating tool then for journalists to continue to sacrifice and pay those dues when the monetary factor isn't there?
I don't know.
Go ahead, Frank.
Maybe it's a question we can't answer.
Yeah, I think, I always thought our salaries were pretty decent. But, are there, $2 million anchors anymore? No, is one station in town maybe paying a little more, perhaps, but you also, I would also talk about the work culture. I thought we had a pretty good newsroom at NBC5, and I think when candidates would talk to people who were in the newsroom, they would get that feedback as well. I would talk about our company, NBC, Comcast, and the opportunities for growth, and all the different things we did. So, I would talk about other things that could help them advance their career, even though they might be at a starting salary and some crappy hours, and, then you have to follow through on that too. But I believe that. I believe that about our company and our station. And again, I think if they did their homework, they would come away with that feeling too, and hopefully choose us.
Yeah, same. I mean, I agree with what Frank said there. I think that there are chances to advance to that, really big money if that's what you're looking for. But keep in mind all of the other things that go into it. So as you go up in market size, you're also typically going up in what you're going to pay for rent, what you're going to pay for lifestyle. So balance all of that when you're looking. What is your commute going to be in whatever larger market you have your mind set on? Versus lifestyle. So, I was on the air in Milwaukee for 25 years, and I honestly came here thinking I'd be here for 2 years. And I loved the lifestyle, and I loved, raising my kids here, and, the commutes and just everything about it. And so I chose to stay in Milwaukee, and there are a lot of people who will do that sort of thing as well. They come to a market thinking that they're just in it for the money, and they're the bigger market, et cetera. And then they realize that other things in their lives are important to them, or being closer to their families or things like that. So, but there's no doubt it's a conundrum for, for television news. None of us get into this, looking to be millionaires. That's not the way it works. Typically we get into this because we have an absolute passion for storytelling and for serving our communities. And so there's some balance there that you'll need to kind of figure out in your own head too.
And you got to remember, money doesn't buy happiness. I mean, like,
But it does for
they've written songs about it. So, there's different things that'll make you happy. And if you're working in a place that is not the best place or is a toxic environment, but you make a lot of money, it doesn't matter. That sort of stuff doesn't balance out. So you have to find the right newsroom fit for you, and hopefully the money. And then the other thing is, you have to ask. If you want to raise, you have to ask. You don't get what you don't ask for.
Thank you, guys. Last question here, because we're running out of time. So if you can be brief in your answers here, and this is coming from Maria. Can you just explain what your hopes are for the future with AI? What you would like to see, like how you would like to see, I'm trying to paraphrase your question here because it's pretty long. How would you like to see a daily or weekly component of AI involved in your newsroom? I think, Chip, like that's all you do. So I don't know if you want to start and then we can kind of go from there.
I mean, it goes back to kind of how I answered it. I'm really looking for AI to be the efficiency maker, not to be a content creator, but to really speed up some of those elements that just take a very long time, but you would still have a human overseeing them and making the creative choices is kind of the broadest way I can answer that question. I do see daily use, though, that it's not like an intermittent thing, that it becomes a part of the everyday workflow.
And Andrew, how would you like to see generative AI?
Yes, very similarly, to give me something to allow me more time to work on the storytelling, the creativity components, the news gathering process, so that when I'm plugging in all the different content holes that I need to fill what I've gathered, it's a little bit more efficient for me.
Beth, if I can ask you from the educational perspective, like how would you like to see AI or the mentioning of it incorporated in the curriculum for students?
I think definitely as a tool, like as Chip and Andrew said, if you can use it to make your workday a little bit easier, I mean, I think we would all like to have some tasks be slightly easier, like using AI for transcription is such a fantastic idea if it saves you time and things like that. I think just thinking of how you can incorporate it rather than, what I think some people see is here's your AI anchor. Like we're not going to be producing a show for an AI anchor, like hopefully, but like seen as the little tools you can do. And that would be a good thing to use in college classes, like get ahead of the technology so people can bring it into their jobs in the newsroom.
And then, Jessie, if I can ask you a separate side of this question is it respected amongst your current company culture using AI?
So new that, I mean, we have company guidelines that any use of AI would have to be run past a manager. And it's just so new that, like I said earlier on, I don't know of anybody who's currently using AI. No one has come to me and said, hey, can I do AI on this story? But on the original question, the first thing that comes to my mind as a news director are more of the guardrails. We just need to be very careful about what we're putting out there and how we're presenting it. I don't want to take a story that AI has generated and stick a reporter's name on it. That feels extremely disingenuous to me. And, I just don't feel right about that at all. So we need to figure out how to make this work. And we don't have a lot of time to figure this out because I think it is going to happen very quickly this year. And so I think it's a fascinating topic. We probably could do a whole panel just on AI, and we probably will be in the not too distant future. So that didn't maybe fully answer, but that's kind of where my wheels are turning thinking about all of it.
You did. Alyssa, your thoughts on the question too?
Just in terms of AI.
Yeah.
I would
How do
say,
you want to see it moving forward? How do you think it'll be?
I would just say using it as a tool for editing. So Otter AI, and then I use Grammarly very often as a Chrome extension. And I think that working a lot of my shift alone, it's really helpful to have an editor when we don't have an editor. So you know, Grammarly is great, but I don't necessarily know if the news judgment is there yet. So I think the future could be as a tool for editing and transcribing.
Frank, would you like to add anything to that?
I would just say AI does not replace journalism. You know, you still need journalism to be practiced. It can make processes more efficient, like Chip was saying. But I give one little.
I'm sorry,
thing.
Frank, we have like 30 seconds because this
Okay.
will automatically shut down.
Oh,
So
well, okay, I'm
I get-
done. I'm done.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to interrupt you. Please, I'm so sorry. But the timing is for 1 o'clock and it is very good at shutting us all down at 1. So I just wanted to thank all of you again for joining us. Some of your questions did not get answered. If you have questions, please email them to Rebecca Cohen. Her email address is on the website, and she will field those questions off to our lovely panelists and get their answers for you. Thank you again so much for your time and all of the effort that you put into joining us this morning. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you.